Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending our business awareness revision session tonight. Tonight, we're going to look at task 6, which is about communication. And the specific area I'd like us to talk about is data visualization. How do we bring data to life? How do we make it easier for the human brain to comprehend? Because as humans, we're not really that good at absorbing tables of numbers. We tend to, most of us work better if data can be illustrated somehow. Whether you'd actually have to produce an example of data visualization in your exams may be unlikely. You may well get questions that would say, what would be the best way to? So with that in mind, let's make a start on tonight's session. And we'll have a look at the task brief for task 6. Task 6 deals with visualizing information and communicating information. One of the things that increasingly we do as the accounts department, the finance function, we're expected to make sense of all of these mountains of numbers and translate what's in the numbers into things that other people in the business, who are the decision makers, who make decisions about resources, about investment, we convert what's happening in the numbers into something that means something to regular folks who are not financially trained. This task is worth 13 marks, giving you 12 minutes to complete it, so it's not one of the longest tasks. Visualizing information, you need to visualize information in different formats. By visualize, we mean, I rather think, present. So we might present in a chart, a table, a graph, an image, or a diagram. And I've got some examples of some quite stunningly effective diagrams to show you tonight. You may be asked to discover patterns or significant anomalies within data. A little example of what we mean by anomalies within data. There was a time when if you were a VAT registered business, you would get an occasional visit from the VAT man. You might be the best organized, best up-to-date, most perfectly run business in the country. You still got a visit from the VAT man just to see that all was well. Nowadays, after they've got you to key your VAT return into their system for them, what happens is the VAT system will look at our VAT return, our boxes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It'll look at the sector of industry that we're in, and it will know that it expects to see a certain relationship, obviously between box 1 VAT and box 5, 6, sales. It's going to expect to see a fairly close percentage correlation, but it'll also expect to see a relationship between what we buy and what we sell. And the software will analyze, and if it expects to see for £1 million of the sales, if it expects to see purchases between 400 and 600,000, if it gets a figure that is within those parameters, then the system is happy and it goes on to its next test. If the software that analyzes our VAT return spots that there is an unusual relationship between the two, we're either making a lot of sales for not a lot of purchases, or more likely not much sales for a lot of purchases, it will flag that as an anomaly. And sure enough, 3 days later, we'll get an email letting us know that the VAT man's going to pop in and pay us a friendly visit. So there's an example that we will encounter in real life of how software is used to analyze patterns and trends within data that we're all very familiar with. And that is called, the term we use for that is exception reporting, in that we don't focus on the 99% of data that behaves the way we expect. We focus on the 1% that doesn't. And that way, the VAT man doesn't have to spend as much time out of the office inspecting, get away with a lot fewer VAT inspectors. And businesses that are within parameters that appear to be doing what's expected don't have their time wasted making cups of tea for that man. Factors to consider. Audience. Who will be analysing and using the data? I'm sure we've all worked for MDs who liked short sentences, simple words. I know I have. Present company accepted. You know, we've all worked for people who want information presenting in nice, simple terms so they can make sense of it, make the decision, get back to the golf course. In a management meeting, I once got a lot of flack for using the word concatenate. And I was reminded of that for at least 2 years after that incident. Far too long a word for the management meeting at that place. What amount of detail do they require? Nothing is more confusing than mountains of detail in information. If there's loads of little bits, the human brain does not easily absorb it. Technical knowledge, you know, there's no point quoting lots of jargon terms to somebody who doesn't know what they mean. Timing. For information to be useful, it must be presented in a timely manner. In simple terms, that means before it's needed. There's no point you producing the most fantastic set of graphs. There's no point you producing the incredibly perceptive information and then handing it in the day after the order's been placed for whatever the decision was. So timely means it's needed when it's needed. Interactivity, what format is required, and do we need to drill down? Oh, there's a jargon word, drill down. I'm guessing, hopefully, maybe a few of the folk here tonight use cloud accounting. Cloud accounting nowadays, you can click on a balance in your cloud account, maybe click on your sales figure, and there it will expand that into how that figure's made up. You know, how much, when you're presenting information, do you need to present it in a form where they, you know, they can look at a bit, oh, if you want more detail, they can either click on it if it's presented electronically. If it's a written report, we've had drill downs even in paper reports for a long time. We use appendices. See Appendix 3, see Appendix 4, whatever. So, required outcome, what do we want to achieve, by when, and how will the data support this? Yeah, that sounds rather obvious. We don't spend hours compiling data, producing reports for the fun of it. Generally speaking, it might be a decision on an investment, might be a decision on whether we need to expand an operation, might be a decision on whether we need to contract. There's always a reason for data, and you need to keep that in mind when putting data together. Data visualization is an output of big data. Here we go, we're into this term, big data. What that means is you've got loads of information. If you can put it into a picture rather than a big list of numbers, it's much easier to understand. And examples are images, charts, diagrams, tables. And I've got examples of some of these for you to see. Matrices, that's the plural of matrix. That's just a table where you've got row across the top, rows down the side, columns across the top. Like a spreadsheet is essentially a matrix. Accounting software packages use dashboards to communicate to non-technical stakeholders. We may be presented with a dashboard in the exam and asked to discover relationships and trends. A dashboard's a collection of shortcuts that'll take you into different sections of your data. Some rules, house rules. Data used should be quality in nature and with enough volume. And enough is an important word, not too much volume. Too much data arguably does more harm than too little, because if there's just so much data that the recipient is buried by it and can make no sense of it, then it really is going to tell them nothing. Quality in nature, and you should be familiar with the qualities of information. It's got to be accurate, it's got to be timely. If you can validate the sources, great, and so on. Finance professionals should exercise professional skepticism. This means you look critically. Does this make sense? Is the question. Does this make sense? One thing I advise with anything where you are carrying out manual calculations, before you accept what your calculator tells you, subject the answer to a reasonableness test. What that means is, if you're calculating, make a guess at what you expect the answer to be, and then if the calculator is somewhere near the guess, then you're probably right. I've seen answers that say things like 15% of 900,000 is 1.1 million. And when you say it like that, you think that's bonkers. But I've marked that in practice exams because it only takes a key to bounce to get a factor of 10 decimal error. So always expect 15% of 900,000. Well, 10% would be 90, so it's a bit over 90, about 130,000-ish. So always subject what you think you're reading to skepticism. Make sure what you're getting from it is making sense. Because, and it's the classic thing that's been the slogan of computers since they were invented, if you put rubbish in to any system, rubbish will come out. And a little bit of a definition: data is just facts. Here's some data. That's pretty meaningless, isn't it? Whereas if we say that these are assignment marks for Michael, Judith, Brian, pick some names off here, Charlotte. If all of a sudden we actually attach those numbers to names, then they have meaning. Now it's information. Now we can say, you know, well done, Charlotte. Judith, let's have a look at one or two things. Those numbers on their own, useless, meaningless, but likewise the list of names you can't do a whole lot with. But when we combine information, give it context, then it becomes useful information. Information presented should be user targeted to aid decision, and it should aid decision making. Again, information isn't there for decoration, it is there for a purpose. It should be up to date so timely decisions can be made. It's got to be there in time for the decision to be made. The other thing to consider, integration with other systems. Often information can be easily generated as a byproduct. So by the simple matter of recording our customer transactions, sales made, payments received, we can generate information for the bank about how much money is owing to us. We can generate information for the taxman of what our revenues and our expenses are. We don't actually have to produce that information, especially we can just get the system to produce it automatically as a byproduct of routine transactions. And this is one area where computers have made a huge difference. 50 years ago, you would literally have had to sit down with all of the separate accounts and add them up. Now we can get these quite automatically. Now, here's an example of data visualization. Apologies for anybody who's not had their tea yet. And this looks at eating trends from the period 1970 to 2019. And I just think this is so wonderful. In 1970, huge amount of beef was eaten. Pork, eggs, chicken, fish and shellfish, certain amount of turkey. And then if we look, by 1980, a lot more chicken was eaten than eggs. There's got to be a joke in there, hasn't there? They can't have eaten that many eggs because they've still got plenty of chickens. And rather humorously, it says the Great Battle of 1987. By the early 90s, chicken had become more popular than pork, and she had using. They've even actually coloured this kind of in keeping with the types of meat, haven't they? And as we look at today, interestingly, chicken is now the most popular meat eaten in the United States. But isn't that a fantastic demonstration? Within 2 seconds of looking at that, even the intelligent use of colours, you know exactly what it means. Not sure what happened with Turkey in 1996. Something happened, but so just by good use of the type, notice how because it's time we work from side to side, and nothing illustrates things that change with time better than lines moving across a page. So there's an example, really a tremendously effective way of showing trends over time. Another one, another American one, because that's what's on the internet. Populations, it might be a little bit small to see. This line here, in 1920, Texas, TX, was the 5th most populous state in the Union, and it's now the 2nd. So you can see by picking out just that one line and joining them together, we can see the trend. Florida, interestingly, was way down in 33rd. 1920, Florida was just a swamp. Some of it still is. Now I think it's America's #1 retirement destination. And look at that, it's now the 3rd most populous state in America. Indiana, if I remember rightly, IA, on the other hand, which of course is one of the central industrial areas that have suffered in recent years. It's gone from 16th down to 32nd. Again, at a glance, very quickly, this is information that you can just absorb. And we've got 4 different trends. We could probably easily expand that up to 5 or 10 without losing clarity. So another great example. Now this one, in the UK, obviously we have splendidly effective employment laws that say in a specific job, men and women are paid the same, and so they should too. I know all the men and women on my team will do the same job. In America, that isn't quite the same as yet. Each circle represents a number of people doing a particular job. The circle we've got down here on the left, this, where's my pointer? This, no, not that one. Not that one. That one. The circle here, the purple circle tells you the number of women who are employed as registered nurses, and the little brown circle is the number of men. And the line between shows you that men are paid a couple of dollars an hour more than women for the same job. Shocking, but let's not get into that. Thankfully, we don't live in a place where that applies. Over here, if we look at, I'm not sure who they are, this one's dentists. There are very, very few women dentists. There are not that many men dentists. Male dentists earn in excess of $70 an hour, and women earn rather less than 60. And I would guess if this was presented with software, you could actually touch on any of these to see what it is. So you can see that just looking at the lines, you get an idea of how in certain professions, the lines are very big. In others, interestingly, in jobs mostly occupied by women, the purple area, the gap is a lot, by and large, a lot less. So a totally different way of presenting. And again, it's very quick and easy to understand what it's saying. Not sure what kind of software you need to produce something like that, though, I must confess. Now, history lesson. History lesson. What was Florence Nightingale famous for? Anybody want to give me a suggestion in the chat? What was Florence Nightingale famous for? No offers, no offers. We all think of her. She was indeed a nurse, Elizabeth. 100% correct. That was her job. Yep, it was the Crimean War, the previous Crimean War. What Florence Nightingale is actually famous for, her great contribution to the world, was taking stuff like this, and this is some of Florence Nightingale's notes of observations that she made of what was going on with the troops she was looking after. She collated information on how many troops died from getting shot and blown up and hacked at with cutlasses and stuff that went on in the 1850s, and how many died just through the conditions they lived in. And she had a relentless campaign from the mid-1850s, when she came back from the Crimea, with government to get the conditions of ordinary soldiers improved. And information like this, she learned that if she... Now here's some more numbers, and there's another part to this one. Here are some numbers between ages of 20 and 25. In the regular population, 8.4 people would die out of every 1,000 persons in a year. Amongst soldiers, it was nearly 22. So soldiers were nearly 3 times as likely to die between the ages of 20 to 25 as ordinary people. 25 to 30, it was 9 against 21, so it's a bit over double. 30 to 35, a bit less than double. Now we can look at those numbers, but how much more effective is that? So by turning those numbers just into lines, and of course, rather cleverly using the colour red for impact, foot guard soldiers, look at that, you can see massively more likely at all ages not to live the year out than ordinary people. And ordinary people didn't have the best life expectancy in the 1850s. So that's one example. The next example of Florence Nightingale's work, this one's a little bit gruesome, I'm afraid. Each of these graphs, each segment, each slice of the pie represents a month at a certain point during the Crimean War. And the one on the right is earlier, then the war finished, which is why the one on the left is smaller. But within each segment, we've got an area in the middle, shows you how many people actually got killed by being shot, blown up, or whatever. And then sometimes it's fairly big, other times it's quite minuscule. The area in black is how many people died of other causes, because people do die, they get ill of just ordinary illnesses. If they're, in swampy areas, there's typhus and all sorts. The scary bit is the blue graph shows how many soldiers died from preventable diseases and infections. So she presented this to the government and said, look at this. This is how many of your soldiers get killed because they're in the war and they're getting shot at. And this is how many die because they get little injuries and then they get infections and we don't look after them. Isn't that absolutely stunning as an image? And it goes a bit further to reinforce the point further. In 1855, Manchester wasn't a very healthy place. I won't make any jokes in case anybody's from Manchester tonight. But the inner circle here represents how many people out of 1,000 head of population in Manchester were likely to die in a given year. And then on the same scale, so the centre dot here is how many people in the general population of Manchester. And Manchester, in fact, was a particularly unhealthy city in the 1850s. It's lovely now. So you can see here that if that's moving from the centre, if that's how many people would die in the general population of Manchester in 1855, a soldier was that many times more likely to die in July of 1854, in August, September. And if we look in January of 1855, that is how many times more likely a serving soldier in the Crimea was likely to die, not through being shot at for all the reasons we've talked about. But isn't that a stunning representation of information? So the armed forces from after the 1850s did see big improvements in the way they were looked after. With no small part thank you to Florence Nightingale. And she is renowned today as the person who, almost the person who invented the concept of turning numbers into visual images. And obviously she did not have Pentium PC and all that to do it with. All she had was a ruler and a pencil. I appreciate this is a little bit of a tangent, but what we're trying to build is a picture of just ways of putting information forward and how you can, you know, maybe in real life you take away some useful tips and hints from this. Not, you know, education isn't just about getting you through an exam, although that is what we aim to do. Now, a bad example, an example of how not to present information. Population by country and country, not quite sure what the heading means. Okay, fair enough. We can see, easy enough, right at the top, China. That's that one, you see the colour. And then India's next. That's easy enough too. But who on earth can read that and tell me the population of Ethiopia or Germany or the UK when they're somewhere in this little lot? What use is that? No use to man the beast. You know, literally it's a pile of colours. Okay, it tells you that China and India are the biggest. And that's really all it usefully tells you. Most of the world, this just tells you so little. So an easy mistake to make is to use the wrong format. A pie chart there is okay. Pie charts are great with a small amount of data, 4 or 5 slices, brilliant. But if you're going to go to that, that is just not effective. Sales Superstore regional dashboard. So here we've got shops that deal in technology, furniture and office supplies. And for whatever reason, all of the ones in the West are coloured yellow. All of the ones in the East are coloured orange. And then green central and blue. Now, it strikes me anybody looking at that map probably knows that all the ones in the West are on the left of the map. So what a complete waste of time colouring them anyway. Why not colour technology one colour, furniture a different colour, and why not within each region do colours? That might be more useful. And I gather that the size of the ball tells you how many sales or what profit is made. It's just a bit hopeless, isn't it? Okay, now back to the task. Things to think about when you are communicating. So again, if you've got a written answer that you have to prepare, you've got to think about the AAT examiner, because that's who you're writing that to. And you've got to think not about how capable the AAT examiner is, but the role they are playing, because they are playing the role of somebody who needs things explaining in simple terms, not a highly skilled examiner who writes exam papers for a living. So things to bear in mind: to whom are you writing? Next consideration, formal or informal. You know, if manager says, can you just jot me a quick note, just tell me what we spent on paper clips last month, you know, it's going to be a 2-line email. If on the other hand he says to you, I need you to put a report together, I'm going to present to the board of directors analysing all of our expenditure on various expenses for the past 6 months, then plainly it's going to be structured in a fairly precise way, and the kind of language that you use. Written documentation, you know, is it just pictures? Is it graphs? Does it need supplementary explanatory notes? Is response or feedback needed? Whenever writing a business letter, one of the biggest things people get wrong is telling the recipient what you want. Please send a credit note. Please can you ring me? please, can you confirm that this has been done? So you do need to make sure that you actually ask if you want something back. How quickly, and again, how quickly, that's going to affect the format. Nowadays, I think for most of us, email really it kind of ticks a lot of boxes, doesn't it? Email, you can send the pictures with it, it gets there instantaneously. On the other hand, if it's a sensitive matter of a legal nature, it may well be that it's going to be the old, can you sign here please, on the doorstep kind of communication. You know, sometimes, do you need proof of delivery? The other issue, of course, with email is confidentiality. How secure is, you know, the PC that is going to receive that email? Does the person have their own secure password protected email? Is it just the company has a general one that everybody gets to read? So things to be in mind. Is a personal approach needed? Is it a dear sirs, you know, anybody will do? Or is there an individual person? One or more recipients? Sometimes it's good manners to keep your line manager on copy. You know, if you're negotiating something, and especially if it's something where possibly somebody might get into, well, you didn't say this and that, you may well keep other people on copy. And then internal, external, plainly makes a huge difference in the tone of what you're going to say. Yep. Once we've decided how we're sending a message, we've got to make sure it's got everything in it. And the easy answer there, I find, is to make a list. If you're writing business letters or reports, make a list of all the things you need to put in it in any old order. Then you sort your list into order. And that certainly should be your first action when you're putting a written answer together in an exam. Job number one is make a list of what you need to say. Then you just a case of, well, that's going to start it, that's second, that's third. Valid information. The information will be used perhaps for plans or decisions, may be very sensitive to accuracy and timing. Therefore, you need to ensure the message is sent are technically correct and valid as they could be a decision made. Yeah, I mean, it almost goes without saying, if you're having to estimate, then you must say it's an estimate, you know, and if it's factual information that's from sources, then, you know, it's vital. I mean, you can't really stress accuracy. It's obvious, isn't it? Timing, as we said, it's got to be there before the decision is made, not after. Confidentiality, protecting from disclosure to others. We can use passwords. Written communications, we may well mark them as private, confidential. Problem is, that's all well and good as long as the person who receives the envelope actually notices that you've put that. And I've heard plenty of people say, oh, I didn't notice that, I didn't see that, sorry. Or they may, you know, they may choose to steam the envelope open and stick it back together again. Very important in an exam, avoid jargon. And it says here abbreviations. The other thing to avoid is colloquialisms. Debtors fail. They don't go bust. Checks, I know we don't see so many checks, are dishonoured. What a lovely old-fashioned word that is. This check's been dishonoured. They don't bounce. And yet, and I've been an examiner and a marker, and I've seen enough bouncing checks in exams. Avoid colloquialisms at all costs. Use the appropriate business language. Plan the content as to its purpose, difference between a quick message and a long report. Recognize your audience. Think about structure and style, which is most appropriate. And don't use concatenate in management meetings. Well, I made that mistake once. Keep it simple, keep it short as best you can. You have to get everything in, but don't labour. Structuring your answers, use headings, short paragraphs. If in doubt, break a paragraph into two. The theory is a paragraph should be one per subject. If you change your subject, it should be a new paragraph. Written pieces of work are much easier to read if they've got gaps, because again, a human brain does not like a big pile of words. We don't cope with it. So break it into paragraphs, space it all out. If you are picking up information elsewhere, make reference to it. In a formal report, although I don't think we have to do a formal report in this unit, but if I don't tell me doing one, use appendices rather than fill the body of the report with lots and lots of detail. Keep it clear. Keep the words short. Use a standardized format where possible. Tone should always be formal, should always be polite. Again, presentation depends on the type of depends on the medium that you're using. Use of correct grammar. Think how you could check this. Certainly in most word processing programs, the F7 key does spelling and grammar. Unfortunately, I have to observe that Microsoft Word puts wiggly lines under all sorts of things. Or is it blue lines? Which is it? Has aversion to the word which. But, if something is flagged, often F7 will check a whole document. Business language depends on several things, style and culture. Every organization is different. And if it's in-house, you get used to what's expected. Which lines of the organization structure communication is intended for, which lines. Again, if you're providing information to the MD, that's going to be different to a little note you're handing over to a colleague. Internally or externally. If formal record is to be retained, again, something that's going to be in writing, make sure that it's something you're not going to look at 3 months down the line and think, oh, I wish I'd worded that a bit differently. Polite, friendly, not overly familiar or too personal. And then finally, quick sample task. Okay, I've condensed this as best I can onto a sheet. We've got a couple of graphs. We've got a table of numbers. We work for Squeezy Cheese, a business which sells different types of cheeses from around the world. So it's a sole trader owned by Taylor Lewis. Client base is expanding through online sales, though they have seen a reduction in sales from retail units. That's kind of the world over at the moment, isn't it? Most of the sales are on a cash basis at the point of sale. However, they recently started to consider working with third-party organizations who would sell their products on their behalf. So that's like as agencies. So other people will sell them, they'll buy them, they'll have an intermediary. The market has seen an increase in competition due to changes in customer tastes. So that means increasing competition. There are more companies now supplying similar products, presumably because they're becoming more popular. So the market is expanding on the one hand, because customers want more cheese, but that means competitors have been attracted. Appendix 1 meant this in a report. This would be the end of the report, which is 6 months to March, and this data finishes a week ago. Finance manager is responsible for analysing results, but he's not there, so you've been asked to step in. Now, very important, what are we being asked? Taylor Lewis would like to know about performance over 6 months, and then expected performance over the next 3 months. So we've got to do some nice simple factual analysis of what has already happened. And then we have got to do a little bit of forecasting, which with only 6 months figures is not easy. Okay. So requirement is to prepare a response in which we discuss the performance over 6 months to March 9 and expected performance, and identify 2 additional pieces of information. And notice that there's 2 marks, so 1 mark for each of those, that might help with our analysis. So we're given a graph of competitor analysis, and you'll notice that actually that green line actually is based on these totals. So there's 270, there's 430, that's 510, 35, 3, 4, 5, and then so that's us there. So what can we see? Jot a few out. Can we see? So October to November was very good, wasn't it? October to December was very good, and we grew at least as fast or faster than our competitors in that time. But then if we look at the period December to January, our competitors have grown. So that's not so good, but then we seem to have recovered February and March. So things have improved. There's a reasonable summary of what we can see there. Looking at the sales mix, cheddar very popular, Lancashire, interesting. There's something. Oops, wrong colour. Brie shot up in November, December, and then dropped off again, as did Gouda. Gouda. So interesting that some products are seasonal. Do people buy, do anybody here get cheese for a Christmas present? Maybe that's what's happening there, or are people roasting them to make like hot warming winter dishes? Who knows? What else can we see? We have what we don't have. Oh, I've thought of immediately something that would be useful. Other companies' product mix. Do they have the same seasonality, or do they have the same range of cheeses? So there's one. So overall, we are 43% better here than we were here. So although we've got that dip, overall we are still from here to here substantially better. They are sloppy and squidgy. Okay. So what do we think is going to happen in the future? Well, our growth at the end, so we'll call this last 6 months. Well, we finished strongly with stronger growth than our competitors. So do we think April, May and June? Let's think about cheese. Sorry again if you've not had your tea. April, May and June, what do we do more of in April, May and June, perhaps, than we do in the winter? Anybody? Any offers? Picnic. Yes. Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah. So I would say that maybe cheese is something that is transportable. So do we think that we should see continued growth? Picnic, seasonal demand, reason for optimism. And you'll notice that the more we kind of look at this, the more ideas start to come. Look, we haven't said much so far about if we get third-party organizations working for us. Now, this doesn't tell us anything about profitability. It's simply telling us about unit sales. But we would think that our third parties will work strenuously because they're making a living out of selling our cheese. So we would expect some growth from that, because if they don't increase our sales, they're not really going to gain much, are they? Change of customer tastes. Expanding online sales, reduction in retail. That's something that's already happening. So, good few points there. We can certainly, one point we can talk about is what's happened so far. We can talk about seasonality. We can talk about the overall picture. We can say that, we said also that it finished strongly. That's a separate point that we can make. Every reason to expect continued growth. We can talk about seasonality. We can talk about the impact of third parties. What else would it be good to know about from our competitors? What their product mix is. Do they offer anything different? For example, do they offer complementary products? Do they sell biscuits as well? Sorry if you're not had your tea. Okay, lots of points we can think of. Notice that here we have a pie chart. To be honest, that doesn't do much for me. I don't think that's the greatest. That really tells us a lot less than that does, doesn't it? If it's over time, this really does paint a vivid picture of strong growth up until Christmas, the Christmas peak, then a dip, and then growing again. Whereas that, it really just tells us nothing useful. And likewise, if we look at the top, there's the same line again of total, but the bar chart split really isn't helpful. A lot more useful for that would be to illustrate that the way the meat consumption illustration I showed you at the start, where if we stack them all together so we can see the thickness of the different bands, would be a lot more useful. Hopefully that's given us all lots to think about tonight. That's the end of tonight's session, and I'm just going to stop the recording. Thank you again for attending tonight.